Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for joining us today on Big Little Small Talk. My name is Megan O'Hara Sullivan and we're here talking to Mark Scholtes, who is, this is what he says, or this is what's written about him. He's an ARIA-nominated and APRA Award-winning songwriter and recording artist, currently signed to EMA Music Publishing Australia. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
So explain the Scholtes, because all I can find is that you've got this crazy stage name and it's not your S, it's your Z.
Yeah, I mean, if the Z on the end of your name constitutes crazy. But when many years ago, on the kind of eve of my debut record coming out, I was signed to Verve Records in New York, and I'd been doing a whole bunch of touring, and we were about to release the record. And almost exclusively every time there was anything in the press about any of the shows I've done, or my name was spelt incorrectly. And so we decided to just go, well, this is how most people think it's spelt, and when they hear it, this is how they tend to want to spell it. So then I have now these two weird kind of the actual spelling of my name.
With the S.
And then the kind of rock and roll
your
spelling.
Stage name with the Z.
Yeah.
Mixing it up. So, you know, when you have to fill out those forms that say, have you ever been known by any other name?
I do have to put that in, yeah.
Well, that's my story too, because I changed my name to Sullivan, then I changed it back to O'Hara, then I changed it to O'Hara Sullivan, so I don't really know what to put down on those silly forms.
It sort of feels like you've done something wrong, like you're trying to hide something.
You've got an alias, exactly. So tell me about being nominated for an ARIA. Like, how do you get nominated for an ARIA award?
Yeah, I mean, the story starts way, way, way back at the start with a fascination for music, and then just kind of obsessively pursuing a career in music, probably in spite of all the signs saying, really, you?
Well, tell me about that. So where did you grow up? Did you grow up here in Toowoomba?
No, I grew up in Brisbane and down in the Redlands on the bay. And I grew up in a house where my dad loved music and my mum not so much. She probably wouldn't admit it, but I think she might hate music.
Nobody hates music, sure.
At least I don't think she derives any enjoyment from it.
Right. Era are we talking? What was Dad playing on the? Did he have a record, or had he moved into the CD era?
This is back when the record player was in the center of the lounge room and the focal point of the. My dad had a pretty eclectic record collection, but the things that really stick out to me were probably things like George Benson and Stevie Wonder and
very cool.
Yeah, he loved the Rat Pack, and then I tried as much as I could to resist a lot of that music. Ultimately, as a grown-up, I realized that music had a profound impact on me, and I actually ended up working with a lot of the people that made a lot of my dad's favorite records of all time. So, yeah, I guess I just loved music. I would sit and stare at the record player going around and around, and then I bugged my parents for years. I want to learn the drum. I want to learn the piano. And then they gave in at some point, maybe when I was about 12 or 13, and I had piano lessons maybe for a couple of years. And then I just sort of made it my own pursuit, just kind of continued to pursue it under my own steam.
So, Mark, was the piano the first thing that you learned? Like, how did you feel about that as a boy?
I wanted to play the drums. And we showed up. My mum eventually took me to a music school. I must have been maybe 6 years old. They said, it might be better if he learns the piano or something for a year and just gets some fundamental music theory knowledge and then comes back to the drums. I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't want to do that. Then nothing happened again for another 6 years or so when we went to a friend's house and they had an organ and had headphones on and playing, and my parents ended up buying that off them, and then I kind of just really kind of just became obsessed with it.
Don't they say that if you can play the piano or organ, that's the foundation of everything, then you can really write music, you can play, you can do
I think
anything.
visually music is laid out in a way that really makes sense when you look at the piano, where things like the guitar it's a little less immediately visible what's going on. So it does give you a pretty good sense of how music works.
Mm. When you said you had to beg your parents for 6 years, I take it you're not an only child.
I'm not, no.
So tell me, you're further down in the family. Who else have you got?
I've just got one brother who's 2 years older than me.
My theory is you have to really beg if you're in a bigger family, and your parents aren't just jumping at the whim of you getting some music lessons.
I think I was pretty young and we were into lots of stuff as kids. And they probably maybe thought this is just something this will be one of those things that he does for 5 minutes. It was just this persistent curiosity that ended up leading me there.
Sure. So just before we keep going with the journey, I want to do the Julia Zamira thing. So what was the first piece of music that you bought with your own money?
I think it was the Chariots of Fire soundtrack.
Would that have been the late 70s?
Maybe, yeah. I can't remember exactly, but I remember buying that on vinyl and thinking it was so cool.
Can you remember the name of the record store?
It would have been Brash's Parlings in Brisbane City.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about the first concert that you went to?
The first proper concert was the Dire Straits Brothers in Arms, which was at QE2 in Brisbane. And we didn't have tickets and I desperately wanted to go and was just miserable. About an hour before it was meant to start, my dad just said, "Get in the car. We'll go and we'll just park in the car park," and because it was sold out. And I was devastated. And then we ended up buying a couple of tickets from scalpers and going in. And it was amazing.
Your father probably loved it too.
He did
love
love
it.
it. Yeah.
Do you think a big concert like that, could you see yourself that was going to be you? Or that's what you would love to do?
Probably not quite yet. It probably wasn't until I remember I left after year 10. The school I was in wasn't continuing music because I was the only kid who was interested in doing it. So I changed schools. And then on my first day of grade 11, I met another kid who was into music. And we were talking about what we wanted to do. And it's like, I don't know, maybe I'll become a music teacher. And he said, why not just leave school and be in a band?
Cool.
Which it had never occurred to me. And then from that moment, I'm like, yes, that is what I'll do.
And is that what you did?
It's exactly what I did. Yeah. I left school after year 12.
That was a compromise.
And I applied to university to do education with no intention of ever doing it, and just kept deferring every year to satisfy my parents. But within a pretty short amount of time, maybe a couple of years, I was pretty much making 100% of my living out of playing gigs.
So Mike, how do you do that? Like, that's the impossible arts dream, isn't it? You know, everyone thinks they want to do it, but they just can't get that break or they can't make a living from it.
I think a combination of dumb luck and persistence, you know. I was doggedly determined.
So what was the big dream? Like, what did you think it was going to look like? Was it going to be able to survive, or was it just going to be able to play as much or write as much?
I'm not a great planner. So I think it was always just, how do I do this for a job? And I always felt like I would much rather be playing music that I don't necessarily like would be much better than the alternative. So just saying yes to any opportunity to do music in exchange for money, which meant mostly playing in lots of covers bands in the early days. And I worked with lots of people that were a little bit older than me who were able to shine the torch into the dark corners and show me how to do it, show me how to make a living from it long before I probably was ever good enough to be able to do it.
Mm. Did you form a band with some of those guys you went to school with, or those sort of typical stories? The silver chair,
Um, for a minute, I was in a band with the kids in my own school, and then I joined a slightly better band from kids in another school. And then when I got out of school, I kind of then started to meet lots of other musicians and get invited to be in other people's bands, and just kind of went from there.
Did you know what sort of music you really liked at that stage? Were your tastes pretty firmed up by then?
I mean, I came out of high school in the late 80s when there was a lot of that kind of hair metal going on.
Nothing wrong with that.
So I played in a lot of bands like that. But at the same time, I was still listening to lots of other stuff, my dad's records, um, Paul Simon and James Taylor. And I maintained a fairly broad listening habit, at least, even though to look at me, you might not have known that I was into anything other than Bon Jovi. I didn't play that kind of music for long either, because I realized that if you played music that girls wanted to dance to, then you could make more money.
That was the secret. I'm just going to digress quickly. Just hearing you saying about your father's musical tastes, which is so formative for lots of young people, and they always talk about what their parents were listening to. Do you have any children?
I don't know.
All right, so you can't influence them with the scattergun approach of all of the music that you love.
I try to influence my brother's boy a little.
Mm-hmm.
He for 5 seconds expressed some interest in playing the drums, and then a drum kit arrived at his house.
Your brother didn't know how to hold out quite like your parents, or that delayed
gratification.
Well, no,
I bought it for him. Probably also to punish my brother a little.
I'll just remind the listeners that they're on 102.7 FM, and we're in Big Little Small Talk with me, Megan O'Hara Sullivan, and we're talking to Mark Scholtes, who is up to the part where he's starting to make a career in music. And where are we sort of heading to? Like, how did you then get to be making your own album?
Well, probably at this point, I hadn't really considered myself a singer. I played keyboards in people's bands. And then I was in a band, we were working a lot. And then the singer left. And it's like, well, maybe I'll just sing for a while until we find somebody. And then that just seemed to make more sense to other people than it maybe did to me initially, like singing out of necessity. But then once I started to sing, the idea of writing my own music made much more sense, because I'd always been involved in writing songs in bands that I'd been in, especially when I was younger. But it never made a lot of sense to me. It was probably a bit of color by numbers. But then once I started to see myself as a singer, it made sense to think about how I might be able to tell my own stories. I got more interested in writing songs than anything else. And that probably is what really drove me to the opportunities beyond just playing covers in pub.
Because that sort of is not your reason for existence, but I read that you said that songwriting is about building relationships. That's part of what it is, isn't it? Is it community, telling your story and who you're collaborating with? Tell me some more about the process of songwriting.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I've probably spent more time than anything else doing and obsessing over the last maybe 30 years. I think for me, it's a way of maybe making sense of the world, making sense of myself, a way of saying things that I don't have the vocabulary to say in my everyday life, or maybe the courage to say. So there's a lot of, it's a really important tool for me to communicate with, whether that's a sort of an internal dialogue that then I turn around to face the public, or if it's really personal things that I never share. There's something about that combination of music and lyrics that just feel really potent, has a way of communicating that I love.
Has your songwriting evolved over the years?
Yeah,
In
it's,
what way? Where have you gone from to now?
I think the ideas get smaller and smaller, and the nuance in the craft gets more and more detailed. I think it's been a process of distillation, of figuring out how to boil off all of the unwanted stuff and figure out how to say everything I want to say in the smallest possible way.
Had you, as a teenager or young adult, did you read a lot? Did you read or write a lot of poetry? Or
I've realized as an adult that I am dyslexic, and that answers the question that I've always had of, like, I love language, but why don't I love books? So I've always really struggled with reading. And in high school, I think I got all the way through grade 12 without ever reading a novel.
how did you go for the book review that you have to do every year?
Yeah, you just fail those assignments.
Or you do the album or something, do you?
I did
Led
sneak in
Zeppelin
a
album.
few song reviews. I remember doing a few poetry recitals that I just recited song lyrics. I don't know why people let me get away with that. But once I made the decision, probably in my early 20s, that I wanted to be a songwriter, I actually went back and listed out all of the books that I was supposed to read in high school. You know, Catcher in the Rye and Kill a Mockingbird and all of the Shakespeare's plays. I went to the bookstore and I bought them all. And I thought, I'll start by actually doing the things I should have already done.
Sorry, Mrs. Morris.
Yeah. I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird and then going, this is why people love books.
Atticus Finch. I'm going to call my first child Atticus Finch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's
So
just
you had a
something
revelation
about that.
there.
Yeah.
And do you think that was just a maturity thing?
I think so. I just kind of wasn't just resistant to somebody else telling me I had to do it, probably.
Oppositional defiance, perfect for a rock star. Now, I just want to talk to you about sort of being the lead singer in a band, because as a mother of 5 boys who were really into music, none of them would sing. And you said you never pictured yourself as a singer. It's a big responsibility to be the lead singer, because you've got to be, like Mick Jagger, dancing and entertaining.
Yeah. I guess it depends. It wasn't until I started making much more thoughtful, quiet, introspective music that I found myself in the center.
So you didn't have to be Mark Knopfler or...
I certainly didn't have to be Mick Jagger, no. And I worked with a lot of singers over the years that were great at that, but I never really saw myself that. I think the music that I see, that I tried to make for myself, is always a bit more, it's just a little bit softer around the edges than that.
I did ask you before, what's the process for being nominated for an ARIA? Who nominates you? Do you have to accept it, the nomination?
I don't think they ask you if you would like to accept or not.
No.
I don't really remember. I do remember having my first record come out here in Australia, and it did quite well. And then there was an ARIA nomination that seemed, I did never ask the question. I think it's just based on some success matrix and some, maybe the record company has to put something in to sort of make you eligible. Or
And what was that like for you, that success? Sort of tell me about that. Was it wild and fast and fantastic and terrifying all at the same time?
I think for me, it was sort of weird, because by the time I had a proper record deal, I had played 4,000 or 5,000 gigs. And I was just entrenched in being a musician. And I've always really valued the process above and beyond anything else. I was always interested in making my own music because I just loved making music. And I could quite happily make things and then never play them to anybody, because the sort of the reward for me is in the doing. The father of what we now know as the Veronicas had come and seen me just coincidentally playing in a pub somewhere with some other musicians one night and said, "Would you be interested in, working with my daughters and helping?" They were 12 at the time. I think I was maybe 22 or something. So I had a relationship with them and their family. And then at some point, they had just signed their record deal with Warner Brothers in America. Their dad, Joseph, rang me and said, "Are you working on anything? Because I'm meeting people all the time that I could maybe pass on something." And I had this album that I'd started making just independently and just sort of got bored with and was sitting on my hard drive. And I said, "Oh, there's that," which I gave to him. And then the next day, the Veronica's publisher rang me and said, "Can you come in for a meeting? Joseph's just given us this thing." I went and met these guys and they said, "In a perfect world, who would you make this album with?" And I'd always loved a producer, Tommy LaPuma. He worked with Frank Sinatra and he worked with George Benson and Barbra Streisand and Miles Davis and Jobim and Stan Getz and all these incredible people.
You just thought, I'll just go for the one that I really, really want.
Yeah. And this publisher said, "Well, let's just send him a copy." He took my CD that he'd gotten off of the Veronica's dad. He burnt a copy, wrote my name on it, spelt it incorrectly, crossed it out and wrote it again, then put a phone number on there. He said, "This will be the worst thing anyone's ever sent to Tommy LaPuma. So he'll have to listen to it. And when he listens to it, he'll have to call us. And when he calls us, we're in business." I thought, well, that's ridiculous if that's your plan. But off they went, and off I went thinking, oh, well, you win some, you lose some. And then I want to say maximum 7 days later, I'm coming home from a gig. There's a message on my answering machine. And I press the button and it says, "Hey, Mark, it's Tommy. I'm hunting you down, baby." And then he laughed and hung up. I thought,
who's playing a joke on me?
Well, this is odd. And then the publisher, Hayden, called me and said, "Did you get a call from Tommy LaPuma?" I'm like, "Yep, I think so." It's like, yeah. 7 days after that, I was signed to Verve Records in New York, and I'm standing on a street corner in Manhattan going, what's going on? And we were about to walk into a restaurant to have dinner and meet him for the first time.
That is an incredible story.
It was just absolutely nuts. And I remember him coming in. I was already seated at the table and he sat down next to me. He said, "Mark, if you're not doing anything tomorrow, do you want to get together and maybe play some music?" And I looked at him and said, "What the hell am I going to be doing tomorrow? That is not that."
I thought you were going to say that you said something to him like, "Oh, you're a lot smaller in real life than I thought you'd be," or,
the whole thing just seemed crazy to me.
Yeah.
And then the next day I went and met with him in this little rehearsal room in Manhattan. I sat down at the piano. There was this enormous room and in the middle was a grand piano and there's nothing else in the room and one chair.
What sort of room in what like a hotel room?
No, it was like a rehearsal studio where like a big band might go and rehearse for their concert tour. But there was nothing in there but one piano and one seat next to the piano. And Tom was sitting in the seat and I walked in and he's like, gestured to sit down at the piano, "Play me a song." And I started playing a song. I must have gotten to the first chorus of the first song. And he stood up and got his phone and he walked over to the corner of the room, and I sort of stopped playing. I'm like, oh, well.
Mate's got to make a phone call.
This was amazing, but I got a free trip to Manhattan, which was pretty cool. Then I heard him talking and he said, "Christian, it's Tommy. Are you available in 2 weeks' time?" Okay, great. Just lock that in. And it was Christian McBride, who's an incredible, probably at the time, the most sought after upright double bass player. He played Sting and he was playing with Diana Krall and all these. And he said, "Okay, we've got a bass player. Who do you like on drums?" Right. And it just kept rolling out like that, just ridiculously. And I found myself in all of these amazing situations as a consequence of this one by chance sort of.
Veronica's father. Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And like, were you starstruck or did you just overcome that and you could sort of love the music together?
I think I just felt overwhelmingly grateful for, I realized that I was seeing a part of the music industry that was rapidly diminishing, that people were, I mean, these guys were in their 70s at the time. And it just felt like this rare privilege to kind of get to see the people that made my absolute favorite records ever and some of the most iconic music ever, and just sort of be there and be part of that for a second. It was amazing.
Oh, I can imagine. And were you ringing up your father saying, Dad, today I met Christian double bass player, mate?
One of my favorite things, like not that long after I was back in Australia and I was on tour with George Benson and Al Jarreau together. One of my earliest moments of like really thinking about music was my dad coming home with George Benson's Breezin' album, which Tommy LaPuma produced, and Al Schmidt, who recorded my album, engineered and mixed. And I remember going on stage at the first show, my dad was in the audience, and I said something like 40 years ago, my dad introduced me to the music of George Benson. And 10 minutes ago, I introduced my dad to George Benson. And my dad stood up in the middle of the arena like, woo! It was like this weird, like there's so many amazing sort of moments that came from that. But I felt like it wasn't really about whether things were going to be successful or not, but just the experiences.
You wouldn't really be worried about it too much after this really life-affirming experiences.
I think the whole time I've always bought into the opportunity just to immerse myself in stuff, in doing. And the moments of things being really publicly, visibly successful were great, but really overshadowed just by I can't believe I'm still doing this. I can't believe I'm getting away with this. I still feel that sense of gratitude for it, whether it's in private or in front of 20,000 people.
I wonder if good things come to humble people. You can't make a comment on that.
I don't know.
It does seem like if you're not out there for the wrong reasons, then good things are going to come to you.
Opportunities just sort of, I've just had this great luck. Late last year, I got invited to go up to the Whitsundays and be part of the Whitsundays Writers Festival. It was Vicar and Linda Bull and Tony Childs, who I loved Tony Childs in the late 80s, early 90s. We spent 4 or 5 days together in a house writing songs, plus the 2 festival organizers who are also great songwriters. And then Tony and I were having a conversation on the plane flying back to Brisbane. Maybe a week after that, I got a phone call. I was at the Carnival of Flowers and I was playing. A couple of years ago, I saw a local singer-songwriter, Andre Fenner, who I thought, this guy's great. I'm just going to impose myself on him and be in his band. So I introduced myself and said, I'm in your band now. I'll be playing keyboards in your band. And we were about to go on stage and play at the carnival. And Tony called me. I said, I can't talk right now. I'm just about to jump on stage and play keyboards in this guy's band. She said, oh, I didn't know you played keyboards. I'll call you back. And then she's called me the next day and said, do you want to be in my band? I'm going on tour with The Cause. And we're playing stadiums to 20,000 people every night. And you'd be playing keyboards. I'm like, you've never seen me do that. She's like, no, it's fine. We spent 4 days playing music together. You tell me you can do it, you're in the band. Like these just crazy things. And then you find yourself sort of doing it, going, this is nuts. I didn't see this coming.
I suppose it's not like you can't do it, but it's just getting the opportunity to do it. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Big Little Small Talk. Today we're talking to Mark Scholtes, who is a, should we say, world-renowned musician, songwriter.
He's a musician and songwriter.
Mark, I want to take you to the other part of your life. You've been able to run this incredible parallel life while making records, getting nominated for ARIA Awards and writing at song festivals, writers' festivals and things. And that is that you have just been, not awarded, but you have just earned your doctorate.
I'm a doctor, yeah.
You're a doctor. Is there a doctor in the house? So tell me about that. You go from being a guy who was never going to do teaching, had no intention of being a teacher to teaching at a university?
Yeah, I think in 2012, I was living in Los Angeles and my job was songwriter. And every day I'd go to work writing songs. My publisher would send me off to write for some TV show or with some artist. And then I came back for a minute and thought it'd be really nice to do some songwriting workshops or something. I feel like I've been thinking about this stuff a lot for the majority of my life, at least all of my adult life. I'd love the opportunity to maybe do some workshops. On that same day, I said that out loud to my partner. And on that same day, someone from the conservatorium, Griffith, rang me and said, would you like to come and do some workshops? My longtime friend and collaborator, Bruce Woodward, who also teaches at USQ, called me and said, would you be interested in coming up to USQ and doing a workshop? One of the academics at QUT, all on the same day, called me and said, would you be interested in coming and doing some songwriting workshops?
Now that's a bit freaky.
I know. But then I ended up coming up and I did all of those things. Then I guess when I came up to Toowoomba, I did some stuff, a little workshop here. And then not long after that, I got asked if I'd like to come and teach the songwriting class for just one semester. And that turned into, would you be interested in taking some songwriting majors and having a little studio where you're dealing one-to-one with our student songwriters. Then I got invited to do a master's degree at the conservatorium.
So you hadn't done an undergraduate degree?
No. So my response to the director of the conservatorium, who I knew way back when I was a young musician, said, would you be interested in doing a master's degree? I said, I don't think I can.
Is it recognition of prior learning?
I've never set foot in a university before. So no, we can make that go away. We can just send your bio. So based on my professional experience, I was able to do a master's degree.
So master's degree in?
I did a research project looking at songwriting craft, and I've always been a believer, like I've always felt that this idea about talent and creativity and being this great mystery, the muse delivers you these beautiful, fully formed works of art, and we're just reeling them in, as being really problematic and actually a bit of a disincentive for young musicians. I wanted to do a research project that looked at the pragmatics of creativity, to say, where do these mystery songs come from? So I started to investigate through my own, like a practice-led project, through looking really deeply at my own practice and the practices and experiences I've had working with other people, about the fact that creativity comes from the work. It's creativity equals options. And these are learnable and practicable skills to really help. Because if you read Rolling Stone magazine or you listen to an interview with an artist talking about their new album, they talk about it in antiquated, romantic ways, because that's a great press story. But it's not really indicative of, I think, what happens in a professional creative practice. And then I got really interested in the idea of unpacking my own creative practice as a way of getting better at it.
Do you think that comes from all that time in the States where you went to work? You went and you were given a brief and you did it.
Yeah, I think you recognize as a professional songwriter that inspiration is incredibly unreliable. And the thing that will get you through every single day is intention. And then to be able to facilitate that intention with craft. I think about it like Lego. If you've got 3 pieces of Lego and you're tasked with building a house, you just can't be very creative. But if you've got hundreds of pieces of Lego, which is basically, understanding how music works in the context of a songwriter.
So what are those pieces of Lego when you're writing music?
I think harmony. So your understanding of chords and chord function, melody, rhythm, language. So as simple as, do you have a decent vocabulary? But then the lyrical form and structure, the way that you the way that you manipulate lyrical phrases, things like rhyme scheme, all those things become the kind of the, I guess if we think about it in terms of acting, there's the script, but then there's the tone of voice and the body language and the staging. The musical and lyrical structure become the body language and tone of voice and the staging for the script. And you're manipulating all of those things so they communicate a particular emotional idea.
Let's just talk about your academic career some more, even though I am fascinated by the art of the songwriting. And for someone who's completely tone deaf, I read where you have these workshops, how to sing together, unleash your inner singer and learn how to sing in harmony. Good luck. But so you did your master's, you got really interested in the craft. And then what happened after that?
Throughout that time, the role I was performing here at USQ as a kind of casual became a permanent role, which I applied for and was lucky enough to get.
Did you still think someone's going to find me out here? Or
Absolutely.
did you feel okay by then?
No, I feel that every single day, still.
Sure, yeah.
But I think that keeps you on your toes, keeps you moving forward.
Even now with your doctorate?
Yeah, I'm really comfortable in this being a learner, being a beginner. And I'm always trying to learn something new. So even as a full-time music academic, I find myself kind of going, I want to do something new. I mean, when I got signed to Verve Records, I was out on the road. I was a piano player and a singer. I think in 1 year, I took 180 flights. Unless I was on stage, I was not in front of a piano. I didn't have any music in my life except for in front of an audience. So I figured I would need to learn how to play the guitar. I set about learning how to play the guitar, and then booked some shows and went out and started playing concerts, playing guitar and singing. And I was really comfortable in that space, like just having something entirely new that I'm entirely awful at. As a musician here, there was one semester where there was no drummer in our cohort. I thought, well,
I learned the drums when I was 6.
I'll learn the drums and I'll be in the cohort as a beginner with the students. And perhaps I know how to get good at things because I have that experience of getting good at other things. And if I apply that to learning how to play the drums, then that actually is really good modeling for the students as a teacher. They need to be comfortable making mistakes and being a beginner.
So 2 things. How much performing do you do now?
Not so much anymore.
You miss that?
Yes and no. I think when you have the opportunity to perform in theatres to audiences that sit and listen intently, you don't want to do anything. You don't want to do any performing outside of that. That's a great privilege. So I'm just much pickier about when and how and where I perform.
And my other question is, your doctorate, did that follow on the work from your master's then? Or what?
Similarly, but I looked at collaboration. Collaboration's been such a big part of my practice. As a songwriter, I learned so much about how to write songs from co-writing with other people. As a band leader, I've learned the great privilege of having amazing musicians bring your music to life. Surrendering your musical vision over to other people and allowing them to bring something of themselves to the music. So I wanted to look at how that interpersonal negotiation happens in a recording studio. When you don't tell anyone what to play, when there's no rehearsals, when there's no demo recorded, you just show up with some songs and have amazing creative people that you respect, and you just enable them to do the work.
So what's the executive summary then?
Yeah, I guess for me, the big take home was just really all about enabling Um, just sort of the importance of creating a space where people feel like they have that agency, and putting the music, presenting the music as the most important thing above and beyond the kind of the individual creative kind of agendas. And
It's so interesting because most bands fall over because of the fractious relationships, isn't it? And so you would have worked so much with people who haven't got that generous spirit and didn't just have the music at its heart. They would have had their ego. So how do you do that? How do you, when you're working with people like that?
I mean, what I think I've had the absolute amazing privilege of working with Tommy LaPuma, and then Larry Klein, who famously worked with Joni Mitchell and Herbie Hancock and Tracy Chapman. And I realized that above their amazing musical brains, what their superpower was putting the right people in a room. I remember Larry Klein, when I was making a record with him, saying, look, if it looks like I'm not doing anything, you know everything's going well. We've got the right people in the room, and it's all working. If it looks like I'm producing this record, then something's gone off the rails, and we're trying to get it back on the tracks. You know?
Interesting. Just tell me what your official title is. You're Dr. Mark Scholtes,
lecturer in songwriting and music production.
Contemporary music.
Contemporary music, songwriting
and production. Do you ever, at Christmas time, you know, one of your old uncles go, mate, I can't believe you're employed to be a songwriter at the university?
It feels like it's the first job that my parents really understand. I remember saying to my mum, telling my mum and dad that I'd gotten this record deal and publishing deal, and I'm saying, well, if that doesn't work out, you know, you're going to have to get a job. I think this is a job, but maybe it's a little easier to understand what that is. I mean, I always like to try to lower people's expectations of me, so it's much easier to meet them. So I feel like finding myself in a job like this, I've finally met my parents' expectations of he's going to go to uni.
Yeah, not only he's going to be teaching at the university. It's a remarkable achievement, and to be able to work in the industry you love and have that other success as well, and still be meeting all these wonderful creative people. You know, just recently, as you say, like Linda and Vicar Bull. Now, unfortunately, I've run out of time, but I had all these questions that I'd read in Uncut magazine. One that Evan Dando from the Lemonheads had answered all these questions, but I don't have any of those for you now. I will ask you my favourite question, which is about the royals. Do you have a favourite royal?
Elvis Presley, king of rock and roll, maybe?
Yes. True. I have had one Elvis Presley before. Ruby Slippers was an Elvis Presley man.
Nice.
So...
I've got a great royal story, actually. I was working in Bali, playing piano in the Grand Hyatt, and this Norwegian family asked me if I would like to come sightseeing with them. And everywhere we went, backpackers would come out of the woodwork and want to get in photos with these people. There was kind of a couple of older ladies and then a younger girl. And they said that their auntie was in a soap opera in Norway. And so she's very famous. And then maybe about a year later, I'd spent a week whitewater rafting and snorkeling and doing all of this sort of Bali stuff with these people.
Why do you think they asked you to come with them?
Because I was working in the hotel. I guess they figured I might have some insider information, so that you come with us and we'll pay for you. Then you can make sure we see all the good stuff because you've been here for a while. But then about a year after, I saw a photo of the Norwegian royal family, and they weren't in the front row. They were up the back, hidden up the back. But these people that I'd spent a week hanging out in Norway, like hanging out in Bali, doing Bali stuff with, were in the Norwegian royal family.
So they didn't say, by the way, we're part of the Norwegian royalty.
No, they were very stealthy about that.
Now, isn't it the Norwegian royal who's just got married to the shaman or whatever? You probably don't follow it as closely as I do. Okay, I'll do a little bit of research and I'll let you know. Now, here's a song for you, and it's always the song that I finish off any interview, and it's the song that can't keep you off the dance floor. Have we got one more apt than an interviewer like you, interviewee?
When I was in my mid-20s, I had this old car, and in the radio didn't work, and in the cassette deck, there was Thriller, and it was stuck in there. I kind of had two choices, resist or lean in. And I still can't resist. Probably anything from the Thriller album.
I thought you were going to say you had two choices, side A, side B, but I suppose you had to turn it over and you couldn't get it out.
No, but it was luckily one of those ones that would play both sides without flipping it. So it would go all the way around.
So Michael Jackson, can you do the moves? Depends on how many grogs you've had.
Once upon a time, maybe. Old grey mare, what she used to be, you know.
Oh, Mark, it's just been such a joy to hear your story. And there was so much more I wanted to hear about Verve Records. I wanted to hear about how you handle your social media and all the rest of it, but we haven't got time. So thank you for making yourself available for talking to Big Little Small Talk. Mark Scholtes with a Z. Wacky. Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.